Good evening, my children. My goodness. We have a full house this evening. Excellent. We just adjust a little here. Much better. Anthony Lynch. Oracle 1204. Pedo Bear. God. And Decadent 7. And Hannah, my goodness. The Reaper's reputation precedes him. Excellent. So you all would like to hear my tales of terror, would you? Yes, no, maybe so? I'll take your stunned silence as a yes. Excellent. I see. Very well. Let us begin. We have 2 tales of terror for you this evening. In the spirit of All Hallows Eve, which is, of course, almost upon us. Our first tale comes from deepest China. It is entitled The Invasion of the Fox Spirits. A long time ago, in the southern part of China, a wealthy merchant had in his house an extra bedroom that members of the family rarely entered. One day, his wife went up to the room for the purpose of looking for something that she had mislaid. To her surprise, when she tried the door, it was locked. Peering through the keyhole, she was startled to see a strange man sitting in a chair. Jumping to her feet, she ran downstairs to fetch the servants, crying, "Thieves! Thieves!" When they returned with sticks and knives to drive the intruders off, they were stopped by the sound of a deep voice beyond the door that roared, "I am staying here with my family. We will keep the furniture, but you can have everything else back." In a flash, boxes, small chests, and other similar objects began flying out the windows, thrown by unseen hands. And then the sound of many feet could be heard, pattering back and forth. Next came a chorus of voices, chanting, "Listen, O master of this house. We have traveled hundreds of miles to come and visit you. Will you not welcome us with refreshments?" Frightened nearly out of their wits, the lady of the house and her servants immediately set out tables filled with food and drink. There was a great commotion, a rush of feet, a clutter of pottery and utensils. Then presently the dishes, the cups, the wine jugs, and... there we go. My apologies. Came crashing down to the ground floor, empty and picked clean of food. From that day on, the invisible intruders remained in the upstairs room, and though they did no more mischief, the master of the house was upset about their presence and summoned a Taoist priest to give them advice. priest had the reputation of being a powerful magician, but he barely arrived in the courtyard of the house when voices from the occupied room called out angrily, "Miserable dog! How dare you come here?" And then, before anyone could lift a finger to help him, the priest was lifted roughly by unseen hands and rudely thrown out into the street along with all his magical paraphernalia. Obviously angered by the incident, the uninvited guests set up an ear-splitting clatter that went on day and night. After several weeks of the incessant racket, everyone in the household was on the verge of madness. In desperation, the merchant sent for the celestial master of the Taoists, whose headquarters was many miles away. He immediately sent forth his highest-ranking deputy to look into the matter. But the moment the deputy entered the courtyard of the haunted house, the invisible voices cried out, "Celestial Master, you are helpless. As for you, Deputy Master, you have come here in vain." And with that, he was raised into the air and dashed to the ground again. Sorry, lost my... There we are. Okay. When he picked himself up, his clothes were torn, and his face was scratched. "Alas," he said, brushing himself off, "these evil spirits are too much for me. Only the Celestial Master himself has the power to deal with them." And so the Celestial Master came. There was great apprehension in the hearts of the household when he arrived, for he had traveled a great distance. But when he entered the courtyard, there were no voices to deride him, and everyone regarded this as a good sign. Immediately, he set to work erecting altars and hanging up charms, after which he lit incense and began chanting incantations. Suddenly, there was a clap of thunder. Then, wow, I totally lost my spot. One moment, my children. Here we are. Clouds above grew dark and rolled about ominously. Then they parted in a flash of red light, and a gnarled old man with a long white beard descended from above on a thunderbolt and roared, "Fear not, my children, for I shall counteract his spells." While these awesome a large ball, as he released it, it rolled along the floor, spinning like it bounded up the stairs. "When it gets to the second floor," he declared triumphantly, "the spell will take effect." But just as it approached the haunted room, the mysterious bearded spirit from the clouds struck a great copper gong, and the Celestial Master's bowl fell. Try as he might, the deputy could not move it. He sighed deeply, shook his head, and said, "It is no use. I must give up." As he gathered up his magical paraphernalia, the invisible voices hooted laughed, cackled, and jeered, keeping up the commotion until long after he had gone. Discouraged beyond all hope, the merchant and his household gave up and resigned themselves to living the rest of their lives with the troublesome spirits. Then one day during the winter, the Celestial Master's failure at exorcism, a party of hunters appeared at the house in the wake of an unexceptionally heavy snowfall. It was nearly dusk, and the winds were howling like disembodied spirits. When they asked if they could have shelter for the night, the merchant welcomed them, taking care, however, to warn them not to go near the haunted room. When he had finished telling them about it, to his amazement, they laughed, saying, "Ah, yes, we know all about such things, honored sir. You are haunted by fox spirits. But don't worry. After we have eaten and drunk, we will take care of them for you, once and for all." After enjoying a long and lavish meal, the hunters took off their guns and gathered beneath the windows of the haunted room. Then, with yells, curses, and shouts, they began firing into the air until the entire area was shrouded in smoke. Although all had been quiet during the night, the merchant was filled with apprehension in the morning as he bade the hunters farewell. Now he thought, out of anger and vengeance, the foxes will treat us more spitefully than ever. But he was wrong, for when he looked up, the windows of the room were all open. The door was unlocked too, and the room was completely empty, except for the fox hair that littered the floor. And there was a strong zoo-like smell. The end. Did you enjoy that, my children? Did that send chills down your spine? Did it make the hair on the back of your neck stand up? Chinese ghost stories are so fascinating, especially to those of you in other parts of the world. They may seem foreign and strange, but they are no less terrifying, and some would say no less real. Our final story this evening is one a little more local, shall we say. Okay, our final story this evening is entitled The MacKenzie Ghosts. The name McKenzie is an old one, and members of the family who bear it trace their lineage back to 13th century Scotland. Like many other old families, the McKenzies possess a number of family ghosts. They are strange spirits indeed. Rather than restrict their nocturnal wanderings to the confines of particular houses, they appear wherever the branch of the family they favor has settled. They are greatly feared. For their appearance is invariably a sign that someone near and dear is sure to die. I can verify that, by the way. That's completely true. Any apparition that appears as an ugly face outside a window. It is long, hasty and narrow. Where a nose should be is nothing but puffy flesh. The eyes, set strangely far apart, are pale, and they gleam with malignant fire. The mouth is thin and hideous, looking more like a wound than anything else, and it is always twisted in an unspeakably evil leer. During the First World War, a Miss Sylvia McKenzie, whose brother was fighting in France, sat alone one evening in the living room of the family house in Edinburgh. As she was reading, she suddenly became aware of a tapping at the window pane. Whirling around, she saw the terrible face glaring balefully at her. Drawing in her breath and clapping her hand to her mouth, she instantly recognized the face. Although she had never seen it before, she had heard it described often enough. As she sat there staring, trembling, not knowing quite what to do, the thing began to fade. As soon as it was completely gone, she tried to refrain from telling the rest of her family about it when they returned from the theater later. But her mother could tell by the pallid expression and drawn mouth that something was bothering Sylvia. When asked directly what the matter was, she dropped her eyes and in a low voice replied, "The face. I saw the face." "God save us!" exclaimed her mother. "That can only mean evil." And indeed, it did. For the next day, news came that Sylvia's brother Robert had been killed at the front. A branch of the McKenzies living in Glasgow is haunted by a ghostly hand that, like the face, always appears before it. It is a terrifying thing, for sometimes it is seen, while other times it is felt. It rarely fails to shock, for there is never any way of knowing exactly what form it will take when it manifests itself. One night, some time ago, a McKenzie and his wife were at a movie. Suddenly they felt an icy hand caress his cheek. He knew it wasn't his wife, because she was sitting to his right, and the hand had touched him on the left side. With visible annoyance, he turned to the person on his left and demanded an explanation. Upon being met with a firm denial, he repeated his complaint to the person immediately behind him with the same result. Moments afterward, he felt a cold hand which rested in his lap. Pulling it back with a gasp, he suddenly remembered the tradition of the ghostly hand. His wife, seeing by now that something was amiss, asked her husband what was wrong. Convinced that something of a dire nature was in the wind, he told her what had happened, and in a state of alarm, they went home. All was quiet when they arrived at their home, and both of them, being in perfect health, were fairly hopeful that nothing was going to happen to them personally. Nevertheless, it was with deep concern that they finally went to bed. McKenzie had barely fallen asleep when he was awakened by something he could not define. Lying there in the dark, he listened, not daring to move, breathing heavily, every muscle in his body tense with apprehension. Nothing happened. There was not a sound. It was more than he could stand. Throwing back the covers, he climbed out of bed, turned on a lamp, and searched the room. After convincing himself that there were no intruders. Sorry, computer is taking a crap. Okay, let's backtrack a second here. After convincing himself that there were no intruders, living or otherwise, he turned out the light and went back to bed. He had barely covered himself when he felt an icy hand on his forehead. With snake-like rapidity, he grabbed out and managed to seize it by the wrist. It was slender, smooth, and soft. As it struggled in his grip, he ran his free hand up the arm as far as the elbow, beyond which there was nothing. Then suddenly he was holding empty air. The next morning, he found out what the warning had meant. He received a telegram informing him of the death the night before of a sister. The icy hand revealed itself to the same household sometime later in quite a different fashion. One of the MacKenzie girls went over to a credenza to get something, then turned to leave the room. Just as she reached the door, she heard a loud crash. Whirling around to see what had caused it, she noticed that a large candlestick had fallen and picked it up when she froze in her tracks. There, protruding from the wall, just behind where the candlestick had stood, was a long white arm with slender, tapering fingers and elegantly manicured nails. As she stood there staring at it, it gradually faded away. After overcoming her initial feeling of shock, she replaced the candlestick and suddenly was struck by a frightening thought. Her mother was ill. Could the appearance of the phantom hand mean that something had happened to her? Rushing upstairs to the bedroom, in a state of mounting terror, the girl arrived at her mother's bedside, only to breathe a sigh of relief. The woman was no worse than she had been before. In fact, in a few weeks, she recovered. But news arrived that a cousin, who had been traveling abroad, was killed in an accident. The end. Did you enjoy that one, my children? So the next time you're at the movies, and you feel your date grasp your hand, make sure it is in fact your date, and not something else. Well, my children, the reaper must depart. The dark crypt calls, and for some reason Wednesdays are always really busy for me. I still don't know why, but whatever. But I will be back tomorrow at 9 p.m. Pacific 12 midnight Eastern Time, every night, Monday through Friday, from now until Halloween. We may even be doing a special extra Halloween show, so be sure to check that out. Thank you for joining me. I hope to see you all again. Until then, my children, pleasant nightmares.